Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance. My name is Chaz Andres, and as always, let's get started with the news. The biggest story of the week? Well, that should be a no-brainer. How about the start of Modern Horizons preview season? Now, I'm recording this video before all of yesterday's previews were revealed, but I've seen enough of the set to know that it is going to be awesome. I mean, who could have predicted there to be several dozen returning mechanics? This is reminding me of Time Spiral, and that is a very good thing. People are going to play a lot of Modern Horizons Limited, even on MTGO, where the pack EV is not likely to be all that great. And that's because this set looks awesome for limited play. Now, unlike in Paper Magic, where it's a bit of a no-brainer to just sort of go out and hit buy on your cart for pretty much any returning card now that it's modern legal because demand is going to go up, that proposition is a little more hit or miss on MTGO. For one, there isn't much of a bling premium for old bordered or old foils or any of that showy stuff on Magic Online. When people buy cards on MTGO, they're really into it for function over form, whereas in Paper Magic, there's just a lot of people who really like to personalize their decks or show off and will pay money to get a much cooler version of a card. The market is also a lot more liquid on MTGO than in Paper Magic, and that's going to affect prices as well. For example, Bloom Tender. In the world of Paper Magic, Bloom Tender is a $50 card, and that's because it was only printed once, a long time ago, and a lot of copies have just sort of been subsumed into private casual collections and are not going to be cropping up on the marketplace at all. Online, Bloom Tender is about 27 cents. It's, a fraction of a ticket, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon. In large part, that's because it's a lot easier to sell your extra copies of older cards than MTGO, and also, there's just a lot less casual demand on the client than in Paper Magic. So what does this actually mean in terms of Modern Horizons release on MTGO? Well, my personal theory is that a lot of these returning cards are only going to go up in price if they actually start showing up in a good new modern deck or two. See, in Paper Magic, because of the lower supply and the less liquid market, the mere potential for a card to be, okay and modern is going to cause some pretty silly price spikes. On MTGO, you're going to need more. A card is going to need to actually start showing up and putting its money where its mouth is. So, in terms of going out and buying these cards as soon as they're released, you can do it, and I recommend doing it for cards that you think are actually going to become new modern staples. But those fringe players, those maybes, you can pretty much ignore those safely for now. Now, one potential exception to this rule might be Flusterstorm. I really don't like to talk about leaks, and I really hate to even bring this one up at all, but I feel like I kind of have to, because it's heavily rumored to be the buy a box card out of Modern Horizons, and that's already causing the price to start to increase. Now, buy a box cards, of course, are not released in their new form on MTGO, which means that Flusterstorm is gaining modern legality without seeing an additional reprint. Granted, it will probably see, an increase in treasure chest drop rate, perhaps significantly, but in the interim, the price is likely to increase significantly. So, if you need Flusterstorms for Modern, I'd suggest picking them up soon. Let's move on now to gaining ground, where in Standard, the card that gained the most ground this week was Teferi Time Raveler, jumping 7 tickets from 14 up to 21. And I don't like to really say I told you so, but I kind of told you so on Teferi. We spent a lot of time talking about Teferi last week. The card is in a lot of the best decks in Standard and in a bunch of decks in Modern as well. That's why it's gaining ground. I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. Teferi is a very good card. It's seeing a bunch of play. The price is going up. Nice and simple. So what does Teferi's future price chart look like? Well, keep in mind that this card is a rare, not a mythic rare, so Arclight Phoenix numbers are almost certainly out of the question. This card is not heading toward 40 or 50 tickets. If it was a mythic, maybe we'd have a different story, but as of now, it actually looks like Teferi has peaked and starting to drop down a bit. Don't think it's going to drop a ton. Again, it does see a ton of play. There are good underlying metrics for it to be an expensive card, but it's possible that the 20 to 25 ticket level might be the high watermark here. It is perfectly fine to buy into Teferi if you need them, but if you're looking to speculate, that ship has probably already sailed. Let's move over to Modern, where the biggest gainer of the week for the third straight week was Mycosynth Lattice. The card gained another 14 tickets from 22 all the way up to 36, and it is absurd how quickly this card went from literal bulk to one of the most expensive cards in Modern. But that's the power of Karn the Great Creator. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Karn Mycosynth Lattice interaction over the past couple of weeks, so I'm not going to rehash how that combo works again today. What I will say is that this price chart is still pointing straight up, which is, I guess, what happens when it's a key card in, every single hot deck in all of the Eternal formats. Let's just say I wouldn't be surprised to see Mycosynth Lattice at the very top of the Modern Gaining Ground chart again next week for the 4th straight week. Let's move on now to our biggest loser, where in Standard it was Kaya Orzhov Usurper, dropping about 4 tickets from 30 down to 26. And this is actually part of a longer cooling trend. Kaya was about 36 tickets back in late April, that was her high watermark, and has been losing a little bit of value every week since. That said, I'm starting to see some signs of a leveling out and a plateau for her price. I wouldn't be surprised if Kaya doesn't drop really too far below the 25 ticket mark until she leaves the set redemption window. So if you're in the market for Kayas over the short term, buying in now is probably fine. If you want them long term, I'd wait until early to mid-July or so to get that sweet post-set redemption price. Let's move back over to Modern, where the biggest loser of the week was Karn Liberated, who dropped about 6 tickets from 31 down to 25. And if you'd asked me back in mid-April what the odds would be that Mycosynth Lattice would be worth more than Karn Liberated at any point during the year 2019, I would have put those odds pretty close to 0%. I mean, that's pretty bonkers, right? At any rate, these two prices are actually related, because while some Tron decks are running both Karn Liberated and Karn the Great Creator in their 75, some are definitely dumping the older Karn to play the newer one. And what that means is that some Tron players are selling their Karn Liberateds in order to buy Mycosynth Lattice and Snaring Bridge and Trinisphere and all the other cards you need for that deck. So look, I wouldn't expect Karn Liberated's price to tank completely. It does still see play in Tron, and the paper price for that card hasn't budged at all. But Karn Liberated does have a fairly recent price history on MTGO of kicking around in the 10 to 20 ticket range, so I wouldn't be all that surprised if the price returns to that threshold again at some point soon. Now, the sneak of the week this week is Ensnaring Bridge, a card we talked about a little bit last week because it's just as big a part of Karn the Great Creator's wishboard as Mycosynth Lattice. Back then, Snaring Bridge hadn't really started climbing in price at all, but it certainly has recently. It started last week about 22 tickets, gained about 5, it's up to 27 now and continuing to rise. This is probably your last chance to buy in the Snaring Bridge for less than 30 tickets for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up around the 35 or 40 ticket mark at some point soon. So Ensnaring Bridge, even though it hasn't been, sneaking for very long, it's definitely a card that's on the start of what I expect to be a fairly significant rise. As always, we're going to end the week by taking a look at the MTGO Traders sales data over the past 7 days. And this gives us a really great sense of which cards are selling the best right now, regardless of price increases or decreases. Now, looking at overall sales by volume, the number 1 card isn't much of a surprise. It's Narset Parter of Veils for the 2nd straight week, an uncommon for More of the Spark that's fitting in all over the place and has been selling well for a while now. We do have a couple of surprises in the 2nd and 3rd place slots though. We've got Karn the Great Creator and Blast Zone. Now, both of these rares are good, but rares usually don't end up this high on this list. This is usually where cards like Fatal Push and Path to Exile and Dive Down go. Cheap commons and uncommons that fit in lots of different decks. So if you take a look at the price charts for Blast Zone and Karn the Great Creator over the past couple of days, you'll see a price increase, but not one that's all that significant. That will probably change at some point soon. Increase in price usually follows an increase in demand, especially with rares, especially recently. So if these are cards you've been holding off on buying, I would say that now is a good time to take a look at, maybe buying a copy or two. Speaking of Karn the Great Creator, the powerful new Planeswalker was also third on the best-selling cards of the week by price list. And that says a lot about not only how many copies of Karn are selling, but how much they're selling for. Also on this list are a lot of other cards we've talked about this week, cards like Teferi and Ensnaring Breach and Mycosynth Lattice, and there's a reason why I've highlighted these cards this week. It's because they're very good in the metagame right now, and they're also selling really well. I'd expect price increases, or at least price stability, for all of these cards over the next couple of weeks. And that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Chaz Andres, and I will see you again next Monday morning for another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance.